South Australia's new Premier to be sworn in later this morning after Labor's thumping state election victory at the weekend. Peter Malinauskas and his deputy, Susan Close, will head to Government House for the ceremony. The rest of the New Look ministry is expected to be finalised this week, with a more diverse parliament on the way for South Australia. 5 seats taken from the Liberals will now be held by Labor women, along with the appointment of the state's first initiated Aboriginal person to hold the portfolio of Aboriginal Affairs. Kyam Maher will take that Aboriginal Affairs Minister role. He's also tipped to become Minister for Industrial Affairs and be the state's new Attorney General. He joins us now. Kyam Maher, good morning to you and congratulations.
Good morning from Ghana Yurta, the country of the Adelaide Plains.
What's your first order of business for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in South Australia?
Yeah, when we get it back in and everyone's sworn in, I think the first order in Aboriginal Affairs will be to restart the treaty process. When we were last in government, we commenced negotiations with Aboriginal nations around treaty, and I think there'll be an expectation, and that's where we will start first. And we've also committed to the other components of a state-based implementation of the Statement from Uluru, so truth, treaty, and voice. So we'll be starting to get on with that as the first order of business. Truth, treaty and voice. Where does South Australia currently stand with those treaty negotiations? Well, they commenced when Labor were last in government 4 years ago, and when the Liberal government came in, that was one of the first orders of business of the new Premier was to stop those treaty negotiations. So we will look to pick up where we left off there. With voice, we did have a model that was put forward by the previous government in the dying days of the Parliament, but there wasn't a lot of consultation with the Aboriginal community, so that's an area that we will start discussion in again, and then a truth-telling process will be the other component of that.
Now, Labor has a pretty solid majority in the lower house as the numbers continue to be counted, but it's unlikely to gain control of the upper house where you sit. Which crossbenchers might switch to help you get legislation through? Will you struggle to get some things done?
No, you're right. It's been a very, very long time since the government in South Australia's held a majority in both houses, so it is a matter of negotiation in the upper house, where I've been the leader of the Labor Party for about 5 years now, and it will be a case of negotiating. There are a returning and an existing Greens member of the upper house who have a pretty strong commitment in Aboriginal affairs, and it'll be a matter, as every government has done since I've been around, of negotiating whatever legislation it is with the crossbenchers in the upper house. It's likely we'll see a total of 4 or 5 out of 22 crossbenchers in the South Australian Legislative Council.
Quite a few independents in play as well. It does look to be shaping up to be a bit of a more diverse parliament. All of the seats Labor winning off the Liberals to be held by women. And your Premier-elect says it'll make state parliament better reflect the society at large. Will there be policy changes that then reflect that diversity?
Yeah, it will be a better parliament. I think from what I've seen, it looks likely that that the Labor Party will have at least 50% of its members of the lower house being women. And it does make for better policy when it better reflects the population of the state. So, I think you will absolutely see some changes.
An easy question for you, but how do you explain the result at the weekend? It took a few people by surprise. Hasn't turned out to be the close-run thing that many were predicting.
No, and I think most of us were predicting it might be closer, but I think there were a number of factors. I think the opening of the borders up in November last year and then leaving them open against health advice when Omicron hit was certainly a factor that when I've been outdoor knocking, people have talked about. And of course, one of the really big factors was the ambulance ramping crisis that's affected our health system.
So how are you going to fix that?
So we've made pretty big commitments in terms of the ambulance ramping crisis and the health system in generally. The biggest point of difference, I think, Glen, in a policy sense, was a Liberal commitment to build a indoor sports stadium for $2/3 of $1 billion. Labor's committed every last cent of that will go into the health system, more doctors, nurses and more hospital beds.
And what about on the COVID front? I've seen suggestion that the Premier-elect is pretty keen to revisit the restrictions and the way you were dealing with the pandemic there. What are you going to change?
Yeah, well, I think the Premier's outlined he'll be meeting very, very quickly with the Police Commissioner, who's the State Coordinator, and the Chief Public Health Officer, just to go through the reasons that there are any differences between what the rules are, particularly around things like close contacts nationally, and what we're doing in South Australia, and to see if there's what the health advice is about maybe bringing them closer in line.
South Australian Federal MP and Finance Minister Simon Birmingham told the ABC at the weekend that at times the state Labor campaign on health and hospital funding had been a bit misleading. What's your response?
Yeah, it might not surprise you. I don't agree at all with Simon Birmingham on that front. Yeah, I think it did energise a whole lot of people who aren't usually involved in the political process. People who work in health, people who are paramedics, to actually get involved in campaigning for the first time. I can understand why Simon might say that. I'm sure he's disappointed with the result, but I just don't agree with him one little bit.
How much was this campaign and this result all about South Australia? Should the federal Liberal Party be worried at all about where South Australian voters sit ahead of the upcoming May federal election?
Yeah, I think it's always difficult, and in a previous role, I was the state secretary of the Labor Party in SA, and I think it's always difficult to draw too much between state and federal. But yeah, certainly there is at least one significant marginal seat in SA, the seat of Boothby. So yeah, I think it does mean that there'll be more of an interest in what happens in South Australia, and I think voters will remember some of these issues. A federal election that's due by the end of May.
Labor, of course, saying the Prime Minister Scott Morrison might have been a bit of a drag on the outgoing state Liberal government of Stephen Marshall. But Mr Morrison says he's not worried by the election results, as it was all about state issues, and they're trying to stay positive. What about that point that he's made that, listen, Anthony Albanese's no, Peter Malinauskas, does he have work to do in South Australia?
Yeah, he absolutely does, Glenn. I know I've been out door knocking quite a lot with various candidates, some of the women who won Labor seats like Nadia Clancy, Sarah Andrews and Erin Thompson. And certainly when I've been talking to voters for the state election at their doors, Scott Morrison regularly comes up. I think Brown Liberal has been not helped and probably tarnished by some of the decisions Scott Morrison's made and the way Scott Morrison has carried himself. So yeah, I think it certainly will be a significant factor at this coming federal election.
You built some high expectations. You need to get on with the job. Are you confident you can deliver for South Australians and all of the things you've promised?
Yeah, I am, Glenn. There are some significant expectations, certainly in my areas, and particularly in Aboriginal affairs. I think there are some legitimate, very high expectations, but I'm very confident we can meet those expectations and deliver what we've promised.
Lots of people will be paying close attention to you as you go about it. We'll stay in touch and talk again. Kyam Maher, thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenn.
The man who will be the Aboriginal Affairs Minister and perhaps the Minister for Industrial Affairs and the Attorney General in the new Malinauskas government in South Australia.